coming out again. And it's a nice warm morning to be able to spend in this lovely, cool environment. And we're really fortunate to have Coralie Jensen with us this morning and her friend Kathy Brown, local author and editor from North Andover. Coralie is a novelist and has written mysteries as well as, has other things to talk about that she's been involved in the editing process. And, we're just really looking forward to hearing about her work, as well as some of the technical pieces that she went through in putting together her book. So thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to make a punch for afterwards, and I've got a little crumb cake so we can have some refreshments together while we look at her books at the end of the program. So thank you very much to Charlie for coming to film again, and to Ed for always volunteering to help me get set up. So I really appreciate the help. We'll just let you go to it.
Thank you. As she said, I'm Coralie Jensen, and I'm an author from North Andover. I started to write in the early 90s after returning from the Netherlands, where my husband and I worked in high tech for 3 years. Instead of being sent home to California, we were sent to New Mexico. Unfortunately, New Mexico doesn't have jobs. So I decided, well, I'm going to do what I always wanted to do since I graduated from Cal Berkeley, is write my novels. And the first thing I had to do was finish something. I think that's the biggest thing authors have. The biggest problem is actually finishing what they're working on. So I wrote my first one, and I finished it in 1995. And since then, I have written 8 novels. My first novel is Past a Point, and this is actually one of my more simple novels. It was a love story set in the fictional village of Past a Point in Labrador. But there are other ideas at play in the book. I brought along some slides for my trip to Labrador, just a few, but that mostly that pertain to the book. The first thing is, I'm sure people here travel, or they get to travel, but I brought a map so you knew how hard it was if you haven't been there to get there. And as you see at the bottom, and I'm supposed to use the laser. Right here, this is North Sydney at the end of Nova Scotia. So you drive all the way there, and then you can either go to St. John's, which is the more populated part of Newfoundland, or Newfoundland as they say, or you can go up here and go up the peninsula, the Western Peninsula. And when you get to the top of the Western Peninsula, you cross over to Quebec, to Pont-Savon. I can't pronounce it that well, sorry. And then you can take a road in here. And the interesting part there was that when you get over there, this is still Quebec. So all the churches, and there are a lot of them, are Catholic. The second you go the mile or two after to get into Labrador, all the churches look the same, but they're Anglican. And that plays a part in my book. You can drive up slowly here, and you get to the first town. Let's look at some of the pictures. This is the ferry that is open most of the year now. There are a few months of the year where it's too icy. But this is the one that goes into Pont-Savon. And then this is the usual weather there. I had a few sunny days, but most of the time it's not sunny. This is just a freighter on the water. And what you see a lot, I went in July, and you see icebergs. And you see more icebergs. Probably more now. This was back in 2003. And then you see more icebergs. An interesting thing was that some people were kayaking out to one of the icebergs to collect the water. They melt the water, and they said that the ice was 3,000 years old, and therefore it was very clean. So we got to drink some of that water. That's just another picture showing what it's like out there. It's beautiful. This is what it's like some of the winters, most of the winters. This was a particularly bad winter here. And this was in 2004, where they had 14 feet. So interesting how you can't see anything when you're driving. This is Fort Tow, where we stayed the first time. And you can see this is a regular town there. How it's not too big. It's sort of sprinkled. It's not organized at all. The road comes down one road through there, and anything off the main road is usually dirt. This is right after, although it doesn't, there's a glare here, there was a pod of 20 whales that came into the bay, and they were making a lot of noise that was echoing off. The road is there on top. But we came down to look at the whales, and I was trying to get a tail, but obviously I didn't. But they were so cute, and they were making a lot of noise and blowing up and barking. So it was it was really nice. The only trouble is when I got out of my car to take the pictures, I'd get black flies, a ton of them, big ones. And they would take big chunks out of my forehead. A lot of the people there, when they're going to stay outside for a long time, they have netting that you can wear. This is a park, Pinbar, right after, it's between, it's going north in Labrador. And this is beautiful and natural. It's really one of the more gorgeous spots. This is Red Bay. And you have your Red Bay t-shirt. That is, it's a fairly big town for there, but it's not that big, as you can see, although this isn't all of it. They also have a whalers museum there that's really interesting, and the whalers came over in the 1500s, and so they have a lot of ship stuff, and so it's really interesting. So it's been, people have been there for a long time, just hasn't grown a lot. This is the road in 2003, right after Red Bay, and that's the highway. It looks like that the whole way, practically. This is where we stayed in Mary's Harbor, and the town that I envisioned was sort of a small, like this. Although this is pretty bustling, but the fish industry is down, so people are kind of poor at this point. You have to remember, there's that dirt highway that goes behind it, and there are roads off the dirt highway. But people had cars even before that highway was there, but they couldn't go anywhere hardly. Maybe connect to the next town. But that was it. So they took boats most of the time. They took a freighter would go up and down the coast. It was easier for them to go around in the winter when they could use the dog sleds or skidoos. Now they use skidoos. That's another picture. And this was a picture, we stayed in a house there. And this was their backyard. And we could hear barking everywhere. We kept saying, what's that? And that was the sled dogs that weren't very friendly because they're not trained to be friendly. But they had put them all together in these cages out there, and they barked all the time. But they didn't use them that much now. There's the road again, and it goes on and on and on. But you don't see anything. It's just a long road. And as you take the towns farther north from Mary's Harbor, what did I say was Mary's Harbor? Mary's Harbor, forgot the name. If you take that road, keep taking it, turns into more forest industry rather than fishing. As you can see by the pictures, of Labrador, which is a strip of land just north and east of Quebec, it is still pristine, if not a bleak place. For Passage Point, I needed an isolated village that was struggling. The fishing industry is very depressed, even more so than here. Most of the people live along the coast where fishing is the livelihood. There are towns inland where mining is, but they are difficult to reach. The Trans-Labrador Highway is still dirt. There are native populations. Subarctic natives live inland and north. This book is not about religion, this is Passage Point, or a particular religion per se. It is sometimes about people's fears about organized religion and about how organized religion can be abused. However, it is more about how people come together and tolerate each other when a single-minded, middle-aged man comes to town to try to teach the Bible. The synopsis is on the back of the book. I'm going to read that first. Jonah Devlin arrives in an isolated fishing village in Labrador to serve as pastor of a community church that the Anglicans had abandoned years earlier. He meets Gabrielle Pye, a young waitress struggling to raise her two brothers in the depressed economy of maritime Canada. When the Trans-Labrador Highway opens the tiny town to the outside world, Gabrielle's crime of forgery, committed when she was just 13, makes her a target of the Canadian police. But that's not all. Just as Devlin attempts to help her, reports of his troubled past reach Passaic. Newspaper stories allege that as a Catholic priest of the States, he had committed unspeakable crimes, forcing him to defend his position to his new community. While Devlin grapples to make sense of Catholic doctrine and endeavors to apply it to his new congregation, the often quirky citizens of Passaic and the surrounding villages educate him on the real purpose of faith. The young waitress, Gabrielle Pye, is only 18. She has been raising her 2 younger brothers since her mother died when she was 13. There were not a whole lot of services available to Canadians living this far out, so Gabrielle sometimes had to tweak the rules to get food and shelter. The Anglicans used to own all the churches in the area. One priest would be sent from St. John's to serve up to 6 neighboring congregations and provide sermons. But finding priests to stay more than one winter in such rugged surroundings was difficult, and keeping up the churches was expensive. A girl led 2 younger brothers from the rocky beach up the gravel road. Her long, dark auburn hair flew in the breeze. She turned around to watch the smooth water glisten in the sunshine and brushed a strand away from her eyes. This was a fine day. There was little in her life other than a day like this. Life was hard for her, and on most days, so was the weather. Through the glare, she gazed at 2 boats dotting the horizon. They didn't move. The late summer's afternoon sun made everyone lazy. She would not be on time to serve dinner for the crowd at the coffee shop, but probably wouldn't be the only one late. "Keep up, Kyle. Why are you dawdling?" "He's fiddling with his starfish again," Jason told her. "He thinks it's dead." "Wait up, Gabby," the younger brother whined. "If I walk too fast, the water in my bucket will spill." Gabrielle turned to face the Anglican church that looked so lonely on the rocky banks of Passau Point. It had been empty for nearly 5 years now. When was the bishop going to send a new priest? They could all use one. Their mother's funeral nearly 5 years ago had been the last service at which Father Benjamin officiated. Then he disappeared, leaving only a note on the locked door. Someone at the coffee shop had heard that he was ill. Something was wrong with his liver. He was old, she thought, and he didn't want to die here where the winter snows would wash up over his cross and bury him even deeper. She shivered at the idea. Jonah Devlin arrives by a small ferry and makes his way to the self-described mayor who hired him to take over the abandoned Anglican church. The mayor tells him that it was a good thing he wasn't a Catholic priest. Says he doesn't know. Just splash it on myself. The captain deftly maneuvered his coaster, turning sharply starboard, letting his stern slide up to the side of the pier and tossing his rope to Jason. Grabbing the other end, Kane hopped onto the deck and moved it around the cleat, finally disappearing below deck. "These here are yours, Mr. Davis, he yelled from below, pushing some cases up onto the deck. "Devlin," he corrected. "Yes, there are 4 of them, I believe." Kane hoisted the last package onto the deck and stared back at himself. "Funny, law, we think on ourselves by the number of bags holding our lives to, you know." "Pardon? You say you're staying, that you won't be going back, come to ice." "Ah, yes. So this is your stuff, Mr. Dooley, you say, do you?" "Mr. Devlin." Yes, he nodded, finally understanding what the man said and looking over at Jason on the dock. "Boy, can you help me with these?" Jason eyed the stranger suspiciously, but walked over and grabbed the bag. Devlin turned to shake Kane's hand, but the captain had disappeared below again. Where's Blackett's?" he asked. Jason pointed the coffee shop across the dirt road. "The place is next door to Blackett's too. The place next door is Blackett's too. It's the store. Which do you want?" But Devlin had already started walking toward the shop, stopping only to look both ways on the deserted gravel road. Devlin climbed up the steps, opened the door, and walked up to the counter. "Tea?" the waitress asked. "We got Labrador tea, and for a bit more, a mug of real tea." "No, thank you. I'm looking for Mr. Blackett." "George," he yelled over her shoulder. "He's probably going to be a few. Why don't you sit yourself down and have something to drink?" "Tea? Coffee?" "Oh," she said, seemingly surprised. "Not from round here, are you? Milk and sugar?" About 10 minutes later, a man walked through the door. "Devlin? Let me see. This Bishop Wells fellow from St. John said you were a minister, not a priest, right?" I'm a priest," Devlin answered, "just not a Catholic priest." He removed his scarf, revealing a shirt and tie under his jacket, and tugged on the knot. Still unused to wearing this contraption. "Thank God for that. People around here are good Anglicans. If a Roman priest came, they'd think the French were not far back of him. We don't want this to be part of Quebec, you know. We're not about to let that happen. No, sir." Jonah can't wait to see his new workplace, but is shocked by its condition. Devlin opened the window and inhaled the salty air. The wind off the sea was brisk. It was only 4, and there were several more hours of sunlight to go, but the breezes were already icy. Dragging his bag into the bedrooms, he opened it and began to fill the bureau in the closet. Stepping back, he saw the movement out of the corner of his eye and stopped short. Approaching the window, he looked down on the road. There was talk. There walked a young lady, her stride long and confident. The woman suddenly stopped and looked up. She backed away, but not for long. He watched her continue up the street, her golden legs slightly bowed. When she stood to look at the church, he noticed her tiny buttocks squeezed into an even tighter shorts. "I didn't know there was prostitution in Passaic," he whispered. "Maybe we should have that service after all, and I think I know what the sermon will be." Of course, that's not the church one. But this is. That's when he first meets Gabrielle. He was ready. Grabbing his prayer book and keys, he started down the steps, ready to face the sun that had so rudely awakened him. The sky was still blue, but the clouds had begun to form on the horizon. He watched the wind carrying a piece of newspaper past him and across the street. Like an abandoned kite, it sailed frantically over the roof of the coffee shop. Was fall over so soon? Was this the sign of an early winter? The lock jammed just as George Pluckett had told him it would. He pulled on the handle and the door easily opened. Inside there was another set of doors. Notices of past services clung to the walls of the narthex, along with photographs brown with age. He paused to examine them. The parish indeed looked like it had been busy. In one picture, several people of all ages lined up to be photographed beside the rector. Eventually he opened the inner doors, expecting to find an aisle framed by pews leading to the hand-carved altar. He hoped the organ still worked, although he planned to have someone from St. John's come and check it out anyway. Instead, he stood just inside the doors and gawked at the sanctuary, a sight unimpeded by pews, by a baptismal font, or even by a pulpit. Staring at the huge yawning shell stripped of most of its pictures, he gazed at the stone altar, most likely too heavy to be carried out. A bare wall to the right of the altar verified that the organ itself was missing too. "Oh my God," he whispered, "what have you given me to do?" Devlin soon finds that he becomes part of the community because of that rundown church. As in his former role, he figures out how to help the community, but most important, he learns how to take support from them too. The first thing Phoebe Slade, the altar guild lady, does is to try to match up the new rector with Judy, an older waitress at the coffee shop who is now single because her husband has run away with another woman. But the middle-aged rector seems to be interested in someone else. Devlin noticed that the families were slowly leaving and the other younger men and women were coming into the bar and grill. Gabrielle's face lit up when she saw them, seeming to be more interested in those her own age. The lights were dimmed and the little electric lamps were plugged in under each table. Gabrielle skipped his table. He leaned down and plugged it in. When she started back, she smiled and nodded to him. Then she turned her back and bent over to look for the cord under the table directly opposite. She sat on her heels before crawling under the table to plug in the light. He scrutinized her actions until he suddenly realized what part of her he was watching. He quickly averted his eyes, but it was too late. The priest caught his breath and looked up to see Judy gazing at him from behind the counter. Heat covered his whole face this time as he imagined those at the other tables gawking at the dirty old lich, leering at the young waitress, saliva running down his long-eyed teeth. "She's only 18 years old," Judy would probably say, her shrill voice cutting through the otherwise foggy part of his brain. "Shame on you, Father," she might add. Life in Passaic is difficult. Principles set down by the Bible have been modified to fit the lifestyle, and religion has to be able to roll like the ships that are the livelihood for these residents. Devlin discovers that the rigidity that defines most organized religions may not be what's important. Perhaps it all comes down to the strength of the community and the golden rule. My second book was written about Newfoundland. I don't know why.
Yeah, they might have some questions.
I was going to do questions at the end.
I know, but it might be easier because they're remembering.
Did anybody have any questions about that? Okay, I'll go on. The Letty's Gifts was my second book, or actually my fourth. The first two never got published. But what I wanted to do a thing on the Anglican Church about women and how women were finally making it in the Anglican Church, like they are in the Episcopal Church here. And I wanted to show you the picture. Here's the map again, and I told you about Labrador. Well, Newfoundland, of course, is the laser, okay, is down here. And you go up, and this is the western part that isn't there are not too many people. And that's the part I took. But if you go over here, this is City of St. John's, part of the book is in that, and there's also a place up here, the northern part, which is quite beautiful. This is one of the villages in the northern part, and the reason I used it is because there was another church coming in there, and there are a lot of Methodists settled in this area. And while I'm not really describing a Methodist church, it is a Methodist-like church. She was born in this, and what you can see from here is how close the water is to the houses. And this is where the boats are, and that's, of course, the normal weather. This is a highway, the Trans-Canada Highway that goes through, this is on the western part, that goes throughout Newfoundland. And what I want to show you is how far you can go without seeing anything but trees. Now there are towns off of this, there are little roads that go in, but you don't know there aren't any signs. So, but it goes on and it goes on. There's just lots. There is a national park in here that's very pretty, but it's very rugged. This is Corner Brook, and this is the Anglican Cathedral in Corner Brook where she finally gets ordained for the first time. And this is the northern tip. This is a hospital in St. Anthony, and what I wanted to show you, this is a hospital in the book that is kind of spooky. So, and you can see why it looks spooky, but it is a really good hospital. It was started by Grenfell, who was an Anglican who did a lot of the, he gave religion to all the natives in Labrador by going up and down the coast with the ship. This is what it looked like in the 60s when she would have been there, because she was born in the 50s. Or a little earlier. I'm not going to do that. Sophie Hawkins overcomes a difficult childhood. The northern part of Newfoundland in the 50s is isolated and backwards. Sophie is born with a gift, something that both saves her and at times nearly destroys her. It's this gift that drives the story, makes her more sensitive and goads her on her journey. But what kind of gift is it? How much sensitivity and how much of this gift is sensitivity and how much is mysticism? The church, where she ends up, has its own interpretation. Sophie Hawkins has a unique gift. Born illegitimately in a poor fishing village in the 1950s, she is set to be consecrated the first woman bishop, Anglican bishop in Newfoundland's Eastern Diocese. Sophie's mother, Letty, died when Sophie was too young to remember her. As a result, the little girl was left to be raised by a cruel grandmother, an abusive minister, and the sadistic overseers of a prison-like orphanage. Under the pressures of a difficult adolescence, her psychic talents emerge not as a blessing, but a curse that leads her to a breakdown. Sophie's survival depends on learning to control her abilities and to confront other traumatic events from her childhood. She turns to psychiatrist Griffin Fairborn, who helps her make sense of the powers and inspires her to enter the priesthood. Along with classmate Noah Lodge, Sophie is sent to an isolated western Newfoundland as a hospital chaplain, where her gift reemerges when she senses imminent danger posed by recent activity on the hospital's 4th floor that decades earlier housed an insane asylum. Some of Sophie's childhood is in dialect. Parts of Newfoundland still uses this dialect, not as much. Television stations and broadcasts from other parts of Canada and the U.S. have influenced how the younger generations communicate. I found the written dialect charming and descriptive. I found the written dialect was reflective of Newfoundland's rugged land and the villagers' fortitude while they faced their difficult challenges. As for the spoken dialect, when I visited Western Newfoundland, I didn't understand a word of it. This story begins with Sophie's birth and the discovery of her inheritance. Letty is her mother, by the way. The thunder crackled, echoing through the clouds. Electricity bounded from cell to cell. The howl of the wind rattled the window pane, and when it stopped, hail drummed the glass erratically. Granny Ivy looked out from her rocking chair and then returned to her knitting, paying little attention to the low groans from the bed just a few meters away. "That's it, Letty. Blow your airs out. It'll pass," she said, not once taking her eyes off of half-finished sweater. Light flashed across the dimly lit ceiling, and the two women froze, waiting for the assault. They were rewarded by a crash that mimicked a giant wave not far from their doorstep. "I can't take it," Ivy finally said, rising from her chair. "It's getting chilly in here. I'm stoking the fire to see if I can get more heat from it. Hell, if I was to go out for more wood in this weather. Can I get another blanket for you, Letty?" Letty released a moan, low and gravelly, like it came from the deep pit of her huge belly. "Now don't be going on, girl. You got yourself into this muddle. I know your mother warned you not to. All them sailors got one, and had you used your brains and taken a look at one of them, you would have thrown it back at them. Instead, you let them jig you like a fish, and they made you sick. I know Esther told you about what those sailors always have in mind. Can't wait to come on shore and take it out. Why Esther didn't give you the polypitchum or saffron or something else that makes you well again, I don't know." Letty screamed. Ivy stood there and waited until the contraction ended. Then she walked over to wipe Letty's face. There, Letty, darling. I know you think she loved him, but he's gone now. What was his name again? Jasper? Jason? Jack off? Damn, if this ship ain't gone down, he's in another port by now, not even remembering your name, and trying to use it on some other fool girl. I don't know if I told you this. We learned about Sophie's mother at the beginning of the book. Letty is considered somewhat retarded. Most in the village of Fortsey Harbor don't think she can take care of herself, let alone raise a baby by herself. She dies of a broken heart while Sophie is a baby, and the little girl is passed from relative to neighbor, eventually ending up in an orphanage when she's in her teens. In the difficult living conditions of the orphanage, a convent in St. John's, Sophie's gift seems to take charge, leading her to a breakdown when she is 17. It is then she meets Griffin Fairborn, a psychiatrist and Anglican priest, and she finally reveals her gift, after she makes a gruesome discovery in the vat of water in the laundry room. I saw lots of sickness and lots of death at the orphanage, Doctor. I saw Victoria's tuberculosis, even though I didn't know what TB was. I knew she was going to die, and I knew we might catch it. How did you see it how did you see that it was contagious? Dr. Fairborn asked, manipulating a paperclip between his fingers. I saw little bugs swarming around Victoria's head. How could I tell the nurse that? She would have thought I was crazy. But I had to tell her that Victoria was real sick. Otherwise, they'd may have made her continue to work with us. Did you try to cure her? No, I knew she was going to die and didn't know how to cure her. Did she die? I don't know. The nuns wouldn't tell me. Sister Josephine explained that no one with TB would ever come back to Warfield, even if she lived. I believe Victoria died. Dr. Fairborn knows something about gifts too, and his influence convinces her to become an Anglican priest. Is that it? The doctor asked. Is finding Alice's body what led you to being checked into the hospital? Yes, but there was something else. Do you want to talk about it now? Not really, but you ought to know why I'm still scared. I think about it sometimes at night and can't sleep. What is it? When the others pulled me off Alice's body, I backed away from it until I stood against the wall, Sophie said, pausing to take another sip of water. I moved along the wall to the laundry doors, but I couldn't get them open because they were too heavy. They weren't usually that heavy. I just may have been too weak to push them open. I wanted so much to get out of the room because there were spirits or ethereal beings flying around the ceiling of the laundry. Fairies? No, I've never seen fairies. They weren't just flying or dancing. They were definitely not content. They saw me and flew toward me, grabbing at my hair and dress. I froze. Did they make any noises? Not that I remember, but they opened their mouths like they were crying out. They were scared, not mean. Your medical records say that when Jane brought the nuns downstairs, you were screaming like a banshee. Were you aware of that? No, I don't remember anything after that. Do you have any theories about seeing spirits? No, but they must have wanted something from me. Unfortunately, I was in no condition to help them. So do you feel that you're in control of this gift now? Have you defined it so that you can tell me exactly what the gift is? How it manifests itself? No, Sophie said, her head down. It seems different every time it comes up. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know exactly what I see that others don't. I think it's a curse. It's a curse because you haven't harnessed it, Sophie. Once you know what it is, you'll be able to use it for good because I think it is a gift. And there are lots of people who need your help. Sophie, relax. I don't think I can do that right now. I don't think so either. I believe you should take a break for a couple of weeks. You didn't say anything about the incident curing the girls during the flu epidemic. Was it normal? I mean, most of them who lived would have probably survived without my doing something. I most certainly believe you saved those girls, Sophie. I don't think for a moment that many would have lived without it. It's a manifestation of that gift that you've got to harness. There's no doubt about that. I don't know how you could possibly tell or that they would be cured. I have a secret too, Sophie. A friend of mine who's also a bishop is alive today because of me. He and I were trouting the Terra Nova River one summer. I made him wear a life jacket even though the river was less than knee high. He scoffed at first because he thought he would look silly, but there was no one around and he knew me. He knew that I could see things others couldn't. He wore a life jacket and it kept him afloat when he fell into a hole and was swept down the river nearly half a kilometer. She is then eventually placed in a Drury hospital to do her work as a priest in the far northwestern part of Newfoundland, in the picture. Unfortunately, her gift convinces her to check into some of the eerier parts of the old hospital building. The 4th floor was the insane asylum. I won't tell you the rest of the mystery, sorry. But there is a whole lot of other stuff in this book. Are there any questions? Let's see if I can get this up. I'll go on to the one you guys are probably waiting for, the Italian one. Got so many ties here to that, too. This is my map of Italy, although most people know about this already. And the place where my book takes place is the later part here. Right in here, in this part of Tuscany. And I know because when Sister Angela looks out from her mountaintop, she can see the ocean, and they can smell the ocean, but it's over another ridge. I traveled to Rome and Tuscany in early 2001. The end of 2001, I wouldn't have flown, believe me. And I started my first mystery, Laurel Verde, on a train through the Alps between Milan and Paris. The author's name here is Ellie Chamberlain. That's me. Publishers have told me that I should use a different name for a different genre, and that's the only reason I do it. It is a family name, so I figure that's not that much cheating. Okay, pictures. This is a church. I have a fictional town called Montriano, but it's taken from San Gimignano. And this is what the church looks like where they find the body. And mine doesn't have 2 doors. I don't know why they have 2 doors, but it still looks like that. There's talk about the towers, and we know San Gimignano has a lot of towers. Well, these are just samples of towers. I've taken a lot of these pictures off the internet. And you notice it's got people can climb up in them sometimes. But why people build towers, they're not sure. They think it's some kind of advertising in the Middle Ages for their goods that they traded. But people still aren't sure why. There's another one. You can see the olive trees, because this is about Laurel Verde, which is olive. There's San Gimignano. Now they have a lot of towers. Montriano is smaller. But what I wanted to point out is that, see, you looked out over the valleys. There's another one of towers, and that's an olive grove, and that's what this is about. In the quiet hill country of Italy, Bernardo's body is discovered propped up against the statue of St. Francis of Assisi in the medieval church where for years he served as an altar boy. A red cell phone presented to the local nun and teacher, Sister Angela, by Montreal Police Inspector DeMarco, alerts her of the crime. Her investigative abilities are needed to solve this perplexing case. Complicated by pressure from the bishop's deputy, Father Sergio, who questions the compatibility of her role as part-time police detective with her teaching vocation. The nun struggles to understand the victim's relationship to the powerful families involved in the production of Oro Verde, the region's famous olive oil. It's green gold. Sister Angela and the inspector learned that young Bernardo was not who he seemed to be. Power, deception, love, and the darkest of family secrets rocked the small village of Montriano and the olive orchards and vineyards that cloaked the landscape around it. That reminds me, I'm thirsty. At the beginning of the book, we find Bernardo Rennie heading home to Montriano from the town in the valley where he worked in an olive oil factory. It's the middle of the night, and he seems to be running from someone. Struggling up the side of the hill, Bernardo glanced over his shoulder to see who shouted him. He could almost hear the raspy pant below, but still could not make out his pursuer. Gulping for air, he paused to listen. The wheezing stopped, but it started again as soon as he began to climb. He checked his watch, nearly 2 in the morning. Bernardo knew he was being stalked. He needed a place to hide and a way to escape. But his mind raced, and he could not think clearly for who was after him. How much time did he have? Would the stalker kill him? The former altar boy was not afraid to die. He had a strong faith and believed he would be with God after death. He did not feel bad for or think of himself. He thought of those who loved him and regretted the pain they would endure if he did not return. The light from the 3/4 moon shimmered as the sultry heat of summer condensed over the grassy fields and curvy rows of grapevines. But Bernardo did not look up until he got to the top of a hill. Before him, his hometown of Montriano unfolded over the crest. The ancient walls that once protected it on all sides had crumbled and were replaced by flowering thickets with benches so visitors could look out over the rows of grapevines, splashes of olive trees, and undulating mist shrouding the farmhouses and fields. Slowing to catch his breath, he stopped to stare at the deserted streets slithering like snakes down the hill and disappearing into the blackness of the village. Bernardo glanced down the road and was relieved that it was still deserted. Spinning around, he followed this street until it curled to the left, leading back to the center of town and a small piazza in front of San Benedetto Church. The front door would be locked, but Bernardo knew where he could get in. Veering right at the steps, he circled the building and turned left into the dark alleyway across from the rectory, scaling a wall and dropping into the bushes behind a bench in the priest's contemplative garden. He followed the stone walk to the sacristy and let himself in. The sacristy was always open. Rumors had it Father Augustus broke the lock when he came in from the wine festival one night. Bernardo smiled to himself. Father Augustus now lived at a retirement cottage in Petrargio. Last he heard, the old priest was still drinking his favorite whiskey, a habit he had picked up in seminary. No one bothered to fix the lock because of the wall and a locked gate protected it. Sister Angela is a middle-aged nun who has lived through and hardly embraces the changes of the church made during John the 23rd's short reign as Pope in the early 60s. She tried hard to follow church doctrine, but seems to forget the rule from time to time when her passion for helping the police urges her to latch onto a case, pulling her away from her teaching vocation. We first meet her as she hikes up to the police station because the police have summoned her to a crime. The mature figure of Sister Angela waddled up the steep slope of Via Pianello. She was agitated, heedlessly trundling over the street's uneven stones, too preoccupied to consider a possible trip or fall. She would be there soon enough. Then she would know what she already suspected. Fortunately, she did not have to wear the old-style habit. Since Vatican II, the uniform had become much lighter and shorter. She no longer had to clutch her skirt as she tackled the deep thoroughfares. Sister Angela had been called early that morning, even before 7, just as she strolled toward the chapel to end morning prayer. It was lucky she carried her red cell phone with her. In just minutes, she would have turned it to vibrate for the service, but the telltale rendition of Ave Maria echoed through the pillared corridor and spilled into the courtyard. The other nuns paused to listen. When they realized it was Sister Angela's phone, they indifferently progressed toward the chapel doors. Sister Angela quickly pulled the wireless from her pocket and pressed it to her ear. It was Inspector DeMarco. Something was terribly wrong. Like San Gimignano, Montriano is high on a hill overlooking the valleys below. If you sit on a bench on the edge of town, you can see the olive orchards halfway down the hill and the numerous vineyards that dot the valley below. Beyond that, Petragio lies at the foot of the next hill. Petragio, an industrial town, has more services and an industry that processes and bottles the olive oil harvested from the orchards around them. On an uneventful afternoon, Sister Angela's walks would have taken her to Porto San Donato. From there, she would look out over the vineyards and olive orchards. A mist would emerge from between the neat rows like rainbows dancing and shimmering in the morning sun. Soon, the carpet of green grass under the meandering succession of vines and branches would turn to gold, and the summer winds would make the tall blades crawl like caterpillars. On hot days, Sister Angela would often stop in the shade of an ancient canopied laundry to dip her handkerchief in the water that trickled into the stone tub, letting the breezes from the sea just over the next ridge cool her damp neck. She would inhale the aroma of the withering meadow. Musty? No, sweeter than that, pungent like a dying rose. And soon the smell of agitation would permeate the salty breezes, the odor of fermenting grapes and pressed olives. She loved it here in the heart of the olive orchards. It was her home. The scenery and relative affluence of the area may be beautiful, but something is afoot. And for all its years of peaceful coexistence with the towns around it, Montriano cannot escape its share of violence. So I took a little town, I kind of ruined it because I put a murder in it. But that's what Laura Baird is about. It's a murder mystery and the nun who goes to solve it and all the trouble she was trying to solve. Are there any questions?
Are you writing another one?
I have written 3 more, and I'm just starting another one. I have one. The last one I wrote takes place in Nunavut. Here we go north again. Nunavut is the new Inuit province, and it used to be that a land mass that was connected to Labrador in the north, but it broke off and became part of it. Yes, the new one that I'm going to write, the new mystery. What do I have? I have one that takes place in New Zealand. I went to New Zealand. See, what I do is I go to where I want to write a book from. And it's kind of a crazy detective there. He's a police detective that was fired, and they want him back to try to solve a mystery. And so...
Is it the kind of one that you have to guess? Or, I mean, there are enough characters
Yes.
that you have to pick the right one?
Yes, but there are also character studies. I like to write about the characters. You know, I meet people and I sort of pick and choose. I don't pick one person.
Will you be under your name?
Well, probably the New Zealand one will be under the L.E. Chamberlain name. But the Inuit one, and then I have a Shaker one, and they're all a little bit of mystery. The Shaker one is about a girl that comes to a girl that lives in the Shaker village because her parents can't afford her, and so she gives her to the Shakers who are willing to take people in. And that was in Massachusetts in the 1830s. And another girl comes in after she's been there for a while, and they become best friends, but she's murdered. So she if I do all my research, which includes traveling or reading all the books and reading online, you know, if I've done that, it takes about 3 months because I already know what I'm going to do. If I don't, if it's a mystery, you really have to figure out the mystery first. Because I'll write the first chapter sometimes just to develop a character, but really to get going on a book, you should know what your mystery is. Yes, somewhat of an outline, and I do fewer outlines the more books I write. So So, but at first I stuck to an outline.
Do you have a name for the book, of the Shaker story? Is there a title?
Yeah, Winter Harvest. I just don't have it out yet.
Okay.
I was trying to get another bigger publisher because that's your goal. When you publish, you start out small.
Right.
And then you try to get one that does more services, that has more money, so you don't have to do all the work.
Yeah.
But that's hard. So I don't know when that's coming out either.
Okay.
I was wondering, why do you have to change your name? Because it's a different genre.
I think that's an old way of doing things, just like women didn't used to write mysteries.
Oh, all right.
And they used to use men's names. But I did it, and once I did it, I thought, I might as well keep it consistent.
So the mysteries are,
Under one. Because mystery is a genre that is usually shorter than the others and less expensive, but you know, I read mysteries all the time. And it was British mysteries that got me writing. When I lived in the Netherlands, I had to speak speak Dutch, but I love to read in English still. So I would just get British mysteries all the time. That's what you could find in English in the bookstores. And so I read all the British mysteries. I loved them.
Were you a fan of the 60s?
Yeah, but it wasn't, not as much. It was more P.D. James, Colin Dexter, ones that are really, yeah, probably. Well, what was available to me.
Yeah.
So I did it. I liked them pretty complicated, but mine I don't think are that complicated. I'm not a brain or anything. I think Colin Dexter, that Inspector Lewis and Inspector Morse, those are really complicated. I really like them.
And the Christie was pretty simple.
Yes, and I think mine are probably more like hers in a way.
too many characters though in it.
But I develop my characters more. I like crazy characters. My new one that's about Berkeley, where I lived for 10 years, Berkeley, California, you know, that's a real crazy one.
That's a very important part of the book, is that developing the character.
That people fall in love with it. And I have had comments on the New Zealand one that the main character, they didn't like him at first, but that was the point. The point was the guy was nuts a little bit, but you get to like him at the end. He's, you know, somebody you want to marry, I guess. Maybe. Yeah, no, he's not. They become real to me. You know, I play cards with them on the computer. Yes.
Question for you. I was thinking of this when you were talking about all the countries. Do you write the book because you felt like visiting that country and this gives you a need to visit it, or do you visit the country, get inspired, and then write a book?
I think what you're saying is, do I have wanderlust? Yes.
So,
I'm terrible. I have been traveling since I was 6. My parents were teachers.
wow.
And we started out with in a trailer and tents and went all over North America. And mostly to see where my family came from and to visit family on the other end. But I was raised in California, and yes, we took the trailer out. And so it's sort of that. But I also feel like I should know what I'm writing about. And the None of It one that I have, I'm not sure I really know. I did a ton of research on that, so you do. But, you know, I may be wrong on some of that because I didn't. I couldn't afford to go up to the Arctic. It's very expensive still. I mean, it's not for travelers that much. It's just beginning to develop because of the green stuff.
Thank you.
And can you tell us a little bit about the editing and publishing process?
What happens is you try to look for a publisher for your book. There are books out there that tell you what you have to give them. If you're writing fiction, you have to write the whole book first, and then you write a query, which is often what you have on the back of your book. You tell about what it is, and you try to tie it to what you think they'd like. And then you write a little bit of a bio about your writing, about where you're published. Now, I've been published in some magazines and anthologies, but it took a while. At first, I didn't make stuff up, but I had to try to make it interesting in the bio without really having publishing credits. And if you're writing nonfiction, then you don't have to, but you have to make this group of things like your chapter headers, what they're going to be. You don't have to write the whole thing. You just have to know the first 2 chapters. And also how you're going to market it, why people would want to read your book. And it's always good in fiction, too, to tell them that information, who you think
mine.
And then you have to be willing nowadays to market your own, like what I'm doing now. You have to be able to go out there and get a base. And so I'm working on people who like my books. And the more people I get. I did go to a publishing event recently. There's Grub Street Writers, is that what it's called, in Boston. And I went to an event there to meet with publishers. And they told me that I had to sell about 2,000 books to get recognized, because that's all they look at, because the computers keep track of everything I sell. They look at your bottom line before they take you out, which is sad. It's not the good book, although I'm sure they do that too a little bit. But you have to be able to sell your book.
Even Barbara Walters has to market her book.
Yeah, they all do. They have a better resource than I have, although I enjoy this more than I would enjoy doing on television only.
Are you talking about selling 2,000 of each book or 2,000 of all your books? When they say
2,000 of each book.
Of each book. That's sure.
And I know how hard it is. My books have been out there, and really nobody sees them. You know, you can put up a website, but if nobody knows how to get to it, they don't find you. So it's more giving people the chance to read them. And then if they like you, like what I do is I'll go and find my authors and see if they have a new book out. And then you get readers that way. And it's word of mouth. The bestseller list actually isn't who's sold the best the most. It's a lot of word of mouth in that. And each bestseller list is taken from someplace else. So you never know what it's on. Like maybe somebody sold in one day most books. But you know, you really don't know what you're looking at there.
Do you have to have an agent?
You do if for some publishers.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't have to have one. I did have an agent for a while in New Mexico, and she kept having me rewrite the book over and over, and then she said, I don't think I like it anymore. Well, she read it so many times, I could see. So you have to watch out about an agent. You try to get one that has an AAR background. I forgot what that is, authors. It's an association of publishers or of agents to make sure that they follow the rules and they don't just take you. And there are, you don't pay people, you don't pay anybody to take your books, okay? Unless you want to do it vanity. And I know that my publisher has a vanity line in England, so, and that means that you pay and you have say over how it's edited, over what pictures are used in it, or everything that you want, but you pay for it. And people do that, and there are people that are so good at marketing, they'd rather do that and then market their books. So you'll hear publishers put it down, but I don't see where there's anything to put down. There's just a different way of doing it. As for editing, I edit books for my publisher periodically, and it's a pain. But that said, I really would prefer that you know someone. You don't just send your book in green, that you really should know how to edit it so that it sounds pretty smooth before you send it. I've read a lot of books on editing, and you know that the language is different everywhere. You can't guarantee anything. But I've read a lot of books on it, what they want, what people want. Like, don't use that many that's, or put the comma here. And it changes. So, but be consistent if you're going to do it that way. Kind of sort of know. And make sure that you try to make the book move. Because if people get stuck, they stop reading. Is there anything else? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Oh, and I forgot the new one. Brockmore, my publisher, is putting out another book. I edited this one. It's fantastic. And if you like historical novels, this is really good. It's by Donald Platt, who lives in Florida, but he taught school. He was a history teacher. And Brockmore is a real person during the Inquisition in Spain. And he has to find out about his background because there's talk that he has mixed blood. So he has to try to beat the people, his enemies, to try to find out. But he was the confessor to one of the sister of the king at that time in the 1500s, Ferdinand. I forget. Okay, but it's really good. It's a swashbuckler and a love story. I'm Coralie Hughes Jensen, and you can find me at www.CoralieHughesJensen.com. And also, my mystery, Laurel Verde, is under the name of L.E. Chamberlain, and the address is www.lechamberlain.com. And these can be found online at barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com under those names.